I want to talk to Scott.
Me too. Let's talk to Scott in South Carolina. Scott, you're live with Eric and V. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, it's good to talk with you guys.
Hey.
I've been listening for a long time.
Cool.
A couple of months, and
Nice.
I find the show intriguing. I find myself. Let me identify myself first, so you know who you're talking to. I am definitely a theist, though I've never called myself that until I started watching you guys.
It's interesting,
I'm a
right?
devout Christian.
As a Christian, I never really kind of saw theist as a title of mine until I saw this conversation too. So totally get it.
Well, I understand it to be a very broad term. Anybody who believes in any kind of God is a theist. So I get
Correct.
that. But I don't believe in any kind of God. I believe in a particular God. I've been a devout Christian for 50 years, since I was 12, which tells you how old I am. In fact, my birthday was just last week. So
Wow.
Happy
belated
birthday.
I know it's weird to get congratulated for not dying. It's remarkable.
Hey, you know, honestly, it's not too bad. I am turning 34 in 2 months, and I did the math. That means that I've officially outlived Jesus, which,
Well,
I don't know. I guess
you look at it that way.
So what can we help you with today, Scott?
Yeah, what's up?
Well, again, let me further identify myself. I am, because the question gets asked, well, what kind of Christian are you? There's all kinds of denominations. I don't identify with any particular denomination, though I do identify as a Reformed, as far as what kind of Christian Reformed theology, if you're familiar with that.
Yep.
Are you?
Yep.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Okay. But that's even the closest I get to identifying myself. It's hard to identify as an evangelical these days because it seems to take on more of a political definition than it does a religious one.
Mm-hmm.
So Reformed, I believe that I hold the Bible to be inerrant and infallible, the inspired word of God. I hold that man can only be saved from his separation from God by faith alone. I hold that even the faith I have is a gift from God to me. I hold that only through the death and resurrection of Jesus was the way paved for my relationship with God to be restored. And I hold that I live for and am made to bring glory to God. Those are the 5 solas. And so
That sounds about right.
That's the kind of Christian I am.
Okay. Thank you for that
Okay.
thorough explanation. That's going to help us a lot in this conversation.
Definitely. It's really nice when
I think
we're not worried about straw manning.
Based
you.
on backtracking, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot that we can dive into, but that said, you have a specific topic that you want to talk about, and we want to make sure that we're kind of
I do. I want to talk about evidence for God. I don't speak in terms of a proof for God because proof is a very subjective thing. One person's proof is another person's non-proof. So I speak in terms of evidence and preponderance of evidence.
Okay.
I thought you were going to say something there.
Oh, I think we may have some definitional issues, but I'm definitely willing to, flesh this out and see, and if there's a problem, then we can address it on the way.
Well, just recently I was looking at some video of looking back on the O.J. Simpson trial, and there was a wealth of evidence that a majority of people believed absolutely pointed to O.J. Simpson as the killer of his wife and her friend. But the jury didn't see it that way. And so that's sort of my contention is that evidence and proof there's a subjective component to them that requires some other something else for people to consider besides just raw evidence and just objective evidence. There's something in their person, in their personality, in their character, in their experience, in their background that gives them an inclination one way or another.
So I if I might kind of tease this out just a little bit with you while we're working through this.
Sure.
When we're talking about evidence, would you agree with me that there's good evidence and bad evidence?
Unquestionably.
Cool. So like if I looked in my alphabet
evidence.
soup and I, saw Allah is God in there, would you consider that good or bad evidence for Allah?
It depends on what evidence you're presenting.
It was in my alphabet soup.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by that.
Alphabet soup. It's
Well, I mean, I know what alphabet soup is, obviously.
yeah. If the letters spelled out Allah in there, would you consider that good evidence?
Oh, literally alphabet soup.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were speaking metaphor.
No.
The word salad, but the opposite, yeah.
Sorry.
That's all good. Would you consider that good evidence or bad evidence?
Certainly not. I would consider it no evidence.
Actually, it is evidence, unfortunately, but it's just bad evidence. So you can have good evidence and you can have bad evidence. And so when we're talking about evidence, I want to make sure that we understand that evidence is not a very, this specific definition. It's a subset, and, you evaluate that evidence to determine how good that evidence is. And when it comes to proof,
yes, but
a proof really requires a demonstration. In mathematics, when you're talking about a proof, you're not, that's not subjective. When you're showing a proof of a thing, you are demonstrating the truth of that thing, by going through the motions to show that that is the fact. So I just want to make sure we don't fall back and forth between colloquial and mathematic or scientific versions of proof. But I'm nitpicking. Go ahead.
No, then nitpick all you want. That's fine. But regarding evidence, though, that's why we don't look at one piece of evidence as proof. That's why it has to be gathered with other evidence than to point in a singular direction. That's at least as far as I can tell.
Go ahead, B.
Yeah, I would say that if we're talking about, say, gathering scientific data, one piece of evidence might be a singular hypothesis that would be tested. And if it held up, then that one hypothesis would be added into a larger group of hypotheses, right? And then we would ultimately come out with a theory. So it would be a situation where one piece of evidence is not what we base a whole theory on. We base it on, we look at each one and we make sure that each one is accurate and strong in and of itself. But the best way to build a worldview is to gather as many hypotheses as possible and present that as a whole. Now, the only concern I would have is whether or not those individual hypotheses bore out, right? Because we can have a whole lot of really bad evidence, and that by itself won't be convincing, right? If the individual pieces aren't convincing, then the whole won't be.
I fully agree. In fact, I think I heard Eric say maybe last week or the week before, maybe 2 years ago, I can't remember which episode it was, that basically a stack of crap is still a stack of crap. Whether
Essentially,
you can pile it as high as you want. It's just still a pile of crap.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I absolutely agree. Which is why we I can't speak for anybody else. Why I reject all other religions, because it's my contention and that of course billions through the last 2,000 years that Christianity points to Jesus as who we claim he is. So without getting into too much of that, very quickly, my preponderance of evidence goes from the design of nature to the Bible itself, to the problem of evil, to humankind and our uniqueness in nature. But the problem of evil is where I wanted to focus.
Sure. So, and by the way, if that's something that you want to go on to, then I'm glad you recognize that would be a number of calls that we'd be happy to take, and kind of talk about each one.
Can I just say, this person is very well organized.
Super well organized. You can tell they watch the show.
I am very much enjoying this conversation, Scott.
Yeah. I mean, you're cutting to the meat so we can get to the juicy parts.
Yeah, the last thing I want to do is waste your time or mine. So
I appreciate it, especially for this format.
But I've watched Matt quite a bit. I've watched you guys quite a bit, and the problem of evil comes up very seldom for some reason. I don't know.
I can tell you why.
Even consider it.
Well, I can tell you why. So the problem of evil was something that was really interesting to me when I was on my way out, because I was contending with this idea that a God that I thought was all loving couldn't be, given the world that we're in. And I thought, this problem of evil, it made me really start to question kind of the nature of the God that I thought existed. And so it was super in the front of my mind, and I was just like, wow, problem of evil. You know, if a God does exist, they're not very nice. They're not a very good person. You definitely couldn't describe them as all loving. But over time, the further out I moved, the more I realized it's kind of a moot point, because I don't think that there's a God in the first place. It's almost like us talking about one of our favorite book series. You know, if we're talking about The Lord of the Rings and I talk about, you know, whether or not Sauron was good or bad, it's niche and it could be a really fun conversation, but it's just speculating on fiction. And I think that's why it doesn't come up as much.
When we talk about evil, that's a very big word. So I think we need to define what we're talking about.
Sure.
Okay.
When I talk about evil, I'm speaking. I think what you're alluding to, and I've heard you talk about before, is the problem of what looks to be unjust suffering on the planet and in the world, and that's certainly a problem and a question and a huge question. What I'm talking about is evil in humankind, man against man, person against person, whether it's a nation against a nation, a people group against a people group, or just from me to you. Evil exists, and I have trouble seeing how that's explainable without what the Bible describes as God.
Sure. Well,
I realize many.
Let's dive in a little bit more into evil, because I think we can actually show you where the problem is. Do you think evil is a thing that exists tangibly in this world?
Tangibly, with palpably, tangibly.
Palpably, yes. Do you think I can hold up like a jar of evil?
I hope not.
Sounds like a Stephen King novel.
Right?
Well, unless it's coffee without cream and sugar, I'd say no.
Heathen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is the first time we've had a Christian Colin with sacrilege to the
yeah,
host.
right. Oh. How dare you?
Well, that'd be
Scott,
a whole other phone call.
Essentially, where I'm going with this is when we're talking colloquially about evil, we're talking about someone breaking the social contract, right? Doing things that are harmful to others. And I like that you're using the term suffering. And I think as long as we're talking about evil that way, it's more of an adjective, and it's not a noun, and it's not a verb. I don't evil someone, right? The thing that I did can be described as evil, right? I don't own evil. It's in the same way that if I walked out in front of a sprinkler, I would be, wet. And so, that description would fit there. And so when you're talking about the context,
so you can wet someone.
No, but someone can be wet. Right. In the same way that an action can be evil, and again, we're talking colloquially as in causing suffering.
Okay. I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly.
Sure.
So is your contention that people themselves are not evil?
I think evil actions are evil, and circumstances can appear evil. The thing is, we use evil so commonly in our language that it has been used as a noun, it's been used as a verb, it's been used as an adjective, and because of that, we find ourselves kind of blending between things. It's really hard to pin down and talk about because of that. And so that's why we're starting this conversation by pinning it down a little bit.
No, I really want to pin it down because
cool.
Because we agree universally, atheist, Christian, Hindu, whoever, we agree that Hitler, Jeffrey Dahmer, Jim Jones, these are people, in your terminology, people who did great evil. Now, we call them themselves, in their core, evil people. Most people would say yes. Would you say yes?
Well, I don't know, because here's the thing. I have a lot of experience in special ed, mental health. And because of that, I see, and I have seen definitely people who, because of their illness, if they go down a really bad path, could do some really terrible things, but with medication and a structured environment and an understanding of, you know, your body and what you're going through and support in doing those things, then I think that can be averted. So I don't think that someone is evil. I think the things that a person can do would be evil. Like, I agree with you.
Do you
Jeffrey
believe
Dahmer
that
and Hitler, they did
mankind-
evil things.
Yeah.
Can I jump in here real quick? Because I
would
do
you-
want to make sure that we get to
Please.
the core of this. Scott, I'm sorry, if you
Right.
wanted to respond to that, you can.
I know what you're going to say. How does this provide evidence for God?
Well, no, not necessarily.
forgot what it-
That is the direction we definitely want to go. But where I'm coming from is you said that this was the best explained by your religion and your belief and your God, the existence of evil, is specifically human agent evil in the world, right?
Yes, among other things, but yes.
Okay, so I have an alternate hypothesis for you, and I would love to run it by you,
Okay.
and I would love to see where you see the holes in mine, and if yours doesn't have those holes.
Sounds great.
Okay, so there is an all-evil God, omni-evil, who created a world where humans were given the free will to be truly, earnestly evil. And due to some fluke, we actually sometimes instead choose to be good. And this is actually the reason why people are good when they try. And then, you know, but there's always that evil component in the world, and there are always evil people. So where does mine go wrong that yours doesn't?
Well, first of all, it's not real. But aside from that, I know it's a hypothesis.
Wait,
Where does it go wrong? Yeah.
Well, I don't think we're worried yet about.
I heard
real.
Eric start to stutter.
I started to, but then you spoke, and I wanted you to be able to respond to me.
Right. At this point, we're
okay.
not worried about real yet.
Actually, I was going to let Eric speak because I'm festering on this one. So Eric,
No, go for it. Just think that through. What
Yeah,
I'm
take your
going to say is that I don't care if it's real yet. We can get through to the proofs of things, but if we're talking about the best explanation for a thing in terms of evidence, in terms of a theory,
Scott, by the way, we're vamping for you to think about it. Go ahead.
then this would be a great
keep
alternate
talking.
theory where all of the same arguments about the problem of evil could be made and flipped, and the same result of humans who are sometimes good and sometimes evil could happen.
Okay, Scott,
But
what do you
in your
think?
hypothesis, in your hypothesis, it sounds like evil is good and good is evil, and it seems the same idea.
Well, essentially,
just with
because
different
I would be going off of the idea that there is an objective moral standard, which is that God. And if that God is omni-evil, then evil would be the preferred way to be.
Yes, but I'd also add that moral standard permeates the planet, whether we're Christians or not, whether we're Jews or not, whether we're Muslims or not.
Right.
Somehow we all have bought in to that standard to varying degrees.
Mm-hmm. Which would make sense if my all-evil God created everything. It doesn't matter if we believe in that all-evil God. We still are, influenced by his creative force.
Exactly, and there would be an understanding around the globe that to murder someone for my own convenience, for my own purposes, to steal something because I want it, to cheat on my wife anytime I felt inclined, that those are all acceptable and good things.
No, they're evil.
No, they're evil.
Morality around the world.
No, you're swapping good and evil. We're recognizing it's evil.
Right. No, the point is to recognize that it's evil and to induce suffering.
Oh, I see. So in this hypothesis, the God who created us and made everything evil, we recognize it as evil, and that it's a bad God that did this.
Exactly.
And the God wants us to be evil.
Right. It's essentially Satan.
Quite
Pretend
honestly, I don't know
Satan
what to
was
do with that hypothesis.
Well, the point that I'm trying to make here is that we can use the problem of evil and flip it and still come out with something that looks very similar to Earth. It still looks very similar to what we have here. So I would contend that your hypothesis is not actually the only one that explains why we are this way, even if we're just taking your argument and flipping it around and not even bringing secular or scientific or evolutionary biology into it.
I would agree. I think there are lots of explanations as to why we have evil, and some of them may be right as far as they go. What I'm contending is that any explanation that has come subsequent to what the Bible presents has come subsequent, and that the Bible is the first and most complete explanation of why we have evil on this planet.
I mean, first let's. There's a lot here to unpack there. I mean, Scott, do you recognize that there are religions that are older than Torah, and that those religions dealt with the same and similar issues?
The Code of Hammurabi.
Yes, but I'm going back. I'm going back to the garden. I'm going back to day one.
Yeah, no, you're going back to a myth that you haven't yet substantiated to the point that I'm not going to grant that in the conversation.
Right. There were gods and creation myths for tens of thousands of years prior to the writing down of Genesis.
Actually, I'm glad you brought this up. I'm so glad you brought this up, because the Bible itself, and Christians miss this, lots of people miss this. And it's not because I'm special, but a lot of people don't miss it. So I just have read, and this is what I get. The Bible itself, how can I say it? That the Bible claims that there are thousands of gods, small g, real gods, real entities. And it doesn't claim that God is the only God. It claims that he is the creator God who created these gods.
Which is why thou shalt not have any other gods before me. It was so potent back in the time. Yeah, I'm with you.
Exactly. Yeah. Psalm 82, Deuteronomy 32.
Yeah, but
Job 1.
Let's make sure we're tying back in.
Mm-hmm.
So, and when I look at the Bible, I don't see what I see is a trajectory, one full story. And the main topic of the Bible is sin, just that little word, sin. How man separated himself from God, decided to go his own way, and the rest of and from Genesis 2 through Revelation 21. There's only 2 chapters in the Bible that have no sin in them, the first and the last. And
wait,
okay,
hold on.
Is God?
This is interesting, Scott, but I'm confused how this is answering the question of why do you think Genesis came before all other creation myths, if there are literally thousands of years of creation myths, Zoroastrianism, Babylon, Code of Hammurabi, that predate.
Well, because if the Bible is to be believed, which
there's the answer.
I do.
Yeah, do you understand what you're saying is, but if I'm right, I'm right?
No,
if the Bible, the if is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, Scott. I'm not going to allow the if to do all the heavy lifting. If we lived in a world where people could fly, then we can have conversations about flying people. If the Bible were to be believed, then you may be right about a lot of statements that you're going to make. I don't grant that the Bible is to be believed. And so if the Bible is to be believed, is moving into fan fiction.
But then we'd have to go into a long discussion of why the Bible is to be believed, and I don't think you have time for that.
No, but I want you to call and tell us why.
But we could certainly have that conversation.
Yeah. So what's interesting, Scott, and what I really, really want to kind of leave you with here is if God commands you to be good, and you were to meet someone who was good, I'm using air quotes because I'm depending on your colloquial understanding of good. Would you know that that person was good, or would you know that, or would you just take that that person was being good because they were being commanded to?
There's not enough information in the question.
Sure. Thou shalt not steal. You meet someone who's not who hasn't stolen before. And so you're like, cool, that person doesn't steal. Do you have any indication about the character of that person other than the fact that they're following a rule, not that they're, maybe they want to steal, maybe they want to murder, maybe they want to rape, maybe they want to do tons and tons of, what we would consider, suffering and evil things. But if they're just following the rules, if they're just doing what was set out for them, then I would contend that they're just automatons. They don't get to take credit for being good, and they don't get to take credit for staying away from, creating suffering, because all they're doing is following those rules. You're creating automatons.
Absolutely. And this is what God did not do, according to the Bible. God did not create automatons. He created people to be in a relationship with him. When we decided to pull away from that relationship, evil ensued.
Okay. So, have you ever met somebody who said, I know I have a black eye, trigger warning for people who deal with domestic abuse. But when somebody says, I know I have a black eye, but I really deserved it. I mouthed off to my boyfriend. It was my fault. Can you see how
I'm intimately acquainted with a situation like that?
Yeah. And unfortunately a lot of people are, because that sounds like the God you're describing now. The fact is, when we talk about the problem of evil, it's because God doesn't stand up.
No, I don't get that. No. Substantiate that. How does that sound like an abuse of God?
Sure. God really, really wants us all to be in heaven, right?
Not as a first. That's like saying, I want my wife to be in the same room with me. That's not the goal, for her to be in the same room with me.
Okay, so then let's be super clear. God wants us to be saved, right?
Saved from what? I mean,
Scott,
these are terms that we throw around, but I'm not sure we know what we mean.
The point that I'm trying to get to is
saying someone had a choice in a matter when actually the person inflicting punishment is in a position of power is abuse. Regardless, like across the board, right? If somebody is in a position of power and the other person has some free will, sure, we'll grant that, some agency. If there is still a power imbalance there, right? And so that is still abusive. Even if we were to grant everything, the free will, the sin, the punishment at the end of days, all of it, it would still be abusive by virtue of the fact that one of the agents, the one who is dealing out punishment, is so much more powerful.
Mm-hmm. No, I can see why you say that, and it makes sense as far as it goes.
Do you have kids, Scott?
But from a relational, I have a daughter. Yeah.
How old's your daughter?
She'll kill me. 35, almost 35.
35. Okay. So we're gonna go back in time and pretend your daughter's a toddler for just a moment. Would you hand your toddler a gun?
2-year-old. So I have a granddaughter who's 2.
Okay. Would you hand your granddaughter a loaded gun?
No, certainly not.
How about a butcher's knife?
No.
And if that granddaughter did something to upset you, would you lock them in the basement and burn the house down?
Certainly not.
Sounds like that's what your God would do. And on top of that, your God's going to say it's the child's fault for doing it. If you consider yourself a child of God, that is a 1-to-1 comparison. So if we want to point out something separate, I've got the Book of Eric right here, and it doesn't do those things.
Yeah, I've seen your Book of Eric. I've looked for it. Is it on Amazon? Because I've looked for it.
Not yet.
Not yet, no. But the idea would be that I think that a holy book that doesn't include gaslighty, abusive language that makes people feel justified for horrendous punishments in those kinds of abuses of power is a better book.
Well, then you're not understanding the story of the Bible, because
I understand the story of the Bible, Scott. I understand the story of the Bible, and also I understand that your statements about about evil and sin earlier in the Old Testament, God killed in the Noah story friggin' everything. Right? God rained down fire on Sodom and Gomorrah, decimating an entire people. Oh my gosh, it's been 30 minutes. Scott, please call back. Obviously, this is the kind of conversation I would love for you to, at some point after COVID, come down and have a beer with us. But
I know. I thoroughly enjoy this. This is the kind of stuff that really gets me kind of percolating. So
awesome.
I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Same here.
And also just so you walk away with something, the live chat has been fantastic and wonderfully, beautifully pedantic. Wet can be a verb. But what I love is that we get to unleash that inner pedant and really kind of dive into the nitty gritty. So even for those people who are saying, they would do it this way or that way, we're just glad you joined the conversation. Scott, thank you for watching, man.
Hey, thanks for the time. Appreciate it, guys.
Take care. Was there anything else for Scott?
No, we're good.
What did you think?
I think we got taken on a journey.
We did, because there were so many just juicy things, and he brought them up, and I know that there are a lot of people who are, oh gosh, you could have stopped him on this, and oh gosh, you could have stopped him on that. But he wanted to specifically talk about evil, and for us to talk about evil, we need to make a lot of assumptions, because I think it is worth saying that if a God exists, that God is not loving. And so in order for us to do that, we need to grant we understand the God concept that they're talking about to the degree that we can have the conversation. We're going to assume that God exists in order for us to have that conversation, and make a lot of concessions to get there. But it is worth having just so that we could get to that place and talk about.
I'm actually very interested. He said he laid out his entire thought process. He said, I come from the place of the universe that is designed. That gets me to the Bible. That gets me to the problem of evil. And that gets me to human uniqueness. So, if we wanted to have just a 4-part conversation with Scott, if you're still watching, call in for one of each of those, and we'll see if it actually gets us to where you're going, because that's the closest to a roadmap that I've heard a theist give me on this show. So I want to dive in farther.
I agree. And I'm excited about that simply because I think that each of those things is crap. And if we can show that each is just piled on, maybe we can kind of adjust and shift that conversation.